Good evening, Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. This is Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'm going to be bringing you the very latest this evening on Hurricane Ida, on final approach to the Louisiana coastline, expected to make landfall tomorrow around midday. I'm going to allow the audience to filter in for the next couple minutes, and then I'll be getting right into the forecast breakdown for Louisiana, timing, and expectations for wind, surge, and rainfall, as well as the lesser impacts that are expected further east along the Mississippi, Alabama, and western Florida Panhandle Gulf Coast as well. So a couple minutes for the audience to come in, and then I'll get right into the forecast. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and this is a visible satellite image from space of Hurricane Ida as the sun goes down over the Gulf of Mexico and Ida wraps up. Now, once again, for those of you who are just joining us, I'm Dr. Ryan Truchelut of WeatherTiger, and I'll be walking you through the Hurricane Ida forecast for Louisiana and the central Gulf Coast, what we know and when we expect the worst of the impacts over the course of the day tomorrow. So here's the center of circulation. Right in here as the sun goes down, and Ida certainly looking like a formidable storm this evening. Let's start by reviewing the key messages from the National Hurricane Center, the key life-saving information they want to convey to people in the path of Ida, and as well as not only in the path, but well to the east of the path where there's going to be significant impacts along the central Gulf Coast as well. The first danger that the NHC wants to communicate is the risk of life-threatening storm surge in southeastern Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, all of which are under storm surge warnings. Potential for 10 feet or more above ground level surge to come in into southeastern Louisiana with this storm. No real change to the forecast there since yesterday, but certainly a very serious situation. The second key risk, the key message from the National Hurricane Center, is that this is going to be a dangerous major hurricane, Category 3 or Category 4. When it makes landfall, hurricane force winds are expected over a fairly wide area of southeastern Louisiana within the hurricane warning area, including the metropolitan New Orleans area, which is under a hurricane warning as well. There's potential for, of course, catastrophic wind damage when a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane comes ashore, especially in coastal areas, but inland as well. And that's key point number 3 from the Hurricane Center, is that damaging winds, especially wind gusts, are going to spread a ways inland here along and east of the track of the center of Ida across much of inland eastern Louisiana and southwestern Mississippi through the day on Sunday and into early Monday. And that's going to cause widespread tree damage and power outages across a broad area, including inland. The fourth key point, and this is a serious danger from this storm too. I don't think the fact that it's point 4 is, represents that it's less serious than the other 3 points, is that Ida is going to produce very heavy rainfall through the day on Monday across the central Gulf Coast, including central and eastern Louisiana, coastal Mississippi, and into coastal Alabama. And there's significant flash flood risks in all of those areas, especially in the New Orleans area. I'm going to get to that in more detail later on in this forecast, but I want to highlight up front that flash flooding is a major risk to all of those areas along and east of the track, especially New Orleans. So moving on to the new 7 o'clock intermediate advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Not a lot of change since the 4 p.m. Central Time advisory, still looking at maximum sustained winds of 105 miles per hour. That's a Category 2 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Movement northwest at 16 miles per hour, continuing to clip along into the overnight hours. No change from the 4 o'clock forecast, but there have been some changes over the course of the day today. So these are the last 8 forecast tracks from the National Hurricane Center. So, last 6 forecast tracks. These X's are where the storm actually moved. And you can see that the most recent forecast, the one from the 4 o'clock Central Time advisory, was a shift to the east. And after really no movement in the track forecast for several days, the track, it wasn't a dramatic change, but it did move a couple dozen miles to the east as Ida's center jogged a little bit further north than west through the afternoon hours. We're getting down to the point where small changes in forecast track do make a big difference in impacts for southeastern Louisiana. And it makes a big difference for central Louisiana as well. If you're in Lafayette or Alexandria, this shift east makes a big difference for you. It brings down the chances of damaging hurricane force wind gusts. And I think the way it looks right now is that Lafayette and Alexandria will see some tropical storm force gusts, but probably not a lot more than that, unless the track shifts back to the west. So continued changes or changing of the track to the east is good news for central Louisiana. It's bad news for New Orleans and eastern Louisiana. So we'll dig in on that later, but I do want to point out that that change has happened. Another change in the forecast is with that shift east, Ida will be getting to the coastline earlier. It's not going to be over the water for quite as long. It'll get to the coast faster. So this is a model run. This is not gospel truth, but it's just one model's opinion of timing. I think it's a reasonable expectation, a reasonable possibility. And it shows basically a Category 3, Category 4 hurricane getting to the Louisiana coastline. And I know that where the water ends and the land begins is a, somewhat of an opinion in this part of the world. But making landfall sometime in the early afternoon hours as opposed to the later evening hours if it was to have tracked further west. So moving up that timeline for landfall into the early afternoon, movement north and northwest, further inland over the course of the evening and into Sunday night. Probably the worst conditions coming in sometime Sunday evening for Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And we'll talk more about what to expect there. But I do want to point out that we have shifted the timeline up a few hours. My recommendation would be, if you still have preparations to make, we'll go back in time here. So this is overnight. You can see there's not a lot of impacts from the hurricane through the overnight hours. If you're preparing, if you're making emergency preparations or leaving, you can still do so safely. Be where you are going to be through at least late Monday by sunup tomorrow would be my recommendation across southeastern Louisiana. But if you have preparations to make, do them tonight. Okay, one other change to the forecast that's slight good news, if to go looking for good news today, is that the rate of intensification with Ida got stronger today. It's knocking on the door of Category 3 strength, but it didn't intensify quite as rapidly as some of the worst case scenarios today. And because of that, NHC forecast has shaved 5 knots off the intensity forecast at landfall, still calling for a Category 4 hurricane with 130 mile per hour sustained winds at landfall. And the forecast yesterday was still for a Cat 4. Cat 3, Cat 4 range is what we're going to get in Louisiana. It's not a big change in impacts, but at least some of the worst case scenarios, I think, maybe are a little less likely just because it didn't intensify as quickly today. But that said, Ida is intensifying into the overnight hours. It's currently located about here, and it's about to move over the loop current of the Gulf of Mexico, which is a place where basically the waters are kind of circulating in a clockwise fashion, and there's very deep, very warm waters because of that circulation. So Ida cuts right across the heart of that loop current overnight tonight, and that's going to really offer it the best opportunity that it has to continue to intensify rapidly. The other kind of feature in place that's helping it intensify is upper level outflow. You can really see how Ida is connected to this upper level jet That's taking all the air coming into the system, and then it's ventilating it, and all that air allowing more air to come up through the storm and it to intensify. If we look at what Ida's doing now, it looks like Ida is starting to intensify at a little bit more rapid of a rate. You're getting some of these deeper, darker, high cloud tops circling the eye. So I think we're going to see continued intensification into the overnight hours. We'll be looking at certainly a major hurricane by tomorrow morning, Category 3 or Category 4 strength. The last couple recon passes that went through were showing pressure falls. There's not currently recon obs, so we don't know exactly what's going on in there right now, but it does look like Ida is intensifying based on satellite imagery. So let's get down into the nitty-gritty of impacts and timing. I'm going to start with the storm surge threat. These areas that the National Weather Service has highlighted in purple, those are the areas that are at the greatest risk of the highest surge. These purple areas are 9 feet or more above ground. Red areas are 6 feet or more above ground. And then areas in orange are basically 3 to 5 feet above ground, including Mobile Bay here. Further east than that into Pensacola, potential for 1 to 2 feet of surge denoted by these yellows here. But it's this area in purple that's at the greatest risk of the highest surge impacts. If we go to the next frame, it's National Hurricane Center is calling for 10 to 15 feet of peak storm surge along and east of the track. Now, that track comes up like this. So basically, areas from Morgan City east are at the greatest risk here. And as that track potentially ticks a little bit further east, I wouldn't be surprised to see this number of surge in eastern Louisiana go higher by a foot or so, maybe up to 8 to 12 feet in the next update, with a potential slight shift east. Going along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, again, 7 to 10 feet of surge. Now, this is a smaller storm than Katrina. These are not Katrina-like numbers of surge. It's a smaller storm than Katrina. It's not going to drive 20 plus feet of surge into the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's just not big enough, even if it was to intensify overnight. So I just want to put that out there. I've seen some Katrina comparisons on the table, people comparing, the category of the storm, but there's a lot more to a hurricane than its category. In this case, that works to the benefit of southern Mississippi. Nevertheless, this is very serious. 10 to 15 feet of surge in southeastern Louisiana has devastating potential. So graphically, these are the areas that are expected to be inundated. Reds at more than 9 feet above ground level. Basically all of southeastern Louisiana outside the levied areas has potential for inundation. So if you haven't heeded evacuation orders yet, if you're in one of these areas, you're probably going to be underwater tomorrow. So I would recommend that you heed the evacuation orders. The life you save may be your own. Going forward with a wind threat, also very serious potential impacts here. Right now, the track comes up basically through Houma and up to Baton Rouge, on areas that are, I would say, within 15 miles to the west of the track, and maybe 20-25 miles east of the track. There's going to be a swath in there that gets those 100-mile-per-hour plus gusts in that area in purple. What we don't know right now is the track going to truly go Houma to Baton Rouge? Is it going to shift a little bit east? The concern here is that right now, if the track actually was to follow Houma to Baton Rouge, New Orleans probably would not get the eye wall, would not get a piece of the eastern eye wall. If the track shifts maybe 20-25 miles east, then New Orleans is in a situation where, yes, you are getting a piece of the eastern eye wall tomorrow evening, and the potential for 100 mile an hour plus wind gusts associated with that, which would greatly increase wind damage relative to the 60-70 mile per hour gusts you would see outside of that eye wall. So this area in purple, that's where you need to be preparing for damaging wind gusts, potential structural damage, wind gusts greater than 100 miles per hour, potentially 120, 130 mile per hour gusts, kind of in this area in there. Outside of that area, certainly potential for tropical storm force wind gusts. Lafayette still on the board with getting tropical storm force wind gusts, but as it stands now, not likely to see the core of the storm, not likely to see structurally damaging winds with that slight shift east in the track. New Orleans, pay very close attention to this. because you could get a piece of the eye wall, and that would definitely up the damage that you would be experiencing from winds. This is the National Weather Service's best guess right now of where those damaging winds are going to go, and it's going to slot in probably, in that Baton Rouge to New Orleans swath. There's going to be, a 25, 30 mile width of, wind gusts of 90 plus miles per hour. We don't know exactly where this swath is going to be. It could be centered over here, could be centered over here, but somebody's going to get some major hurricane force wind gusts across southeastern Louisiana. This is kind of just another look from a model of kind of the range of areas that could see those hurricane force gusts outlined here in brown. And again, potential for hurricane force wind gusts goes up into southwestern Mississippi as well. And much of Mississippi will be seeing at least tropical storm force wind gusts into the day tomorrow, as well as areas along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Another very important risk to discuss is flood potential. This is probably an underestimated risk, but I think it's going to be a very serious impact of this storm. And we're looking at these areas in purple. That's where there's the highest potential of flash flooding, slotting neatly here into southeastern Louisiana, including Baton Rouge and New Orleans, with a wide area extending north into Mississippi of major potential for flash flooding as well. This is the National Weather Service precipitation forecast, calling for an area of 10 to 15 inches of rainfall across southeastern Louisiana. Dramatically less rainfall in the western half of Louisiana, just talking about a couple inches maybe in those areas, not flood potential type stuff. Flooding risks are going to be focused here on southeastern Louisiana and Mississippi, and that's not sensitive to the exact track. It doesn't matter if the track shifts 20 miles east or west. Southeastern Louisiana is going to get this broad area of 10 plus inches of rainfall. So they're highlighting a 50% chance of flash flooding in that area between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Those areas highlighted in purple. High risk of excessive rainfall. And on days when a high risk of excessive rainfall is issued, those regions of high risk are responsible for about 90% of the flood damage in this country and 40% of flooding-related deaths. So the flooding issue is something to take very, very seriously. If you're in a low-lying, flood-prone area anywhere in that purple region, you need to have a plan for seeking higher ground. You need to get to higher ground because it's very likely, or certainly extremely possible, that those areas too will be underwater, not due to surge, but due to freshwater flooding. Final risk is tornadoes. Always a chance of tornadoes along and east of the track. That doesn't seem to be too serious of a risk with this particular storm, so I won't belabor that. So just going back to the infrared image, Ida's a beast, y'all. It's wrapping up, likely to be a major hurricane soon. Category 3 or 4 by morning. NHC calling for Category 4 at landfall. Landfall expected sometime in those early afternoon hours tomorrow. And, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Houma, Morgan City, these are all areas that are very possibly going to get core of the most damaging wind from Ida. So you need to be ready to seek durable shelter in those areas. Have a plan, because this has the potential to be a devastating storm. So with that, I'm going to look for some questions. Lafayette, I think I covered this earlier. Lafayette, the slight shift east benefits you in the Lafayette area, so I'm just expecting, some rainfall, few inches of rainfall, tropical storm, wind gusts in the Lafayette area. I don't think you're going to see hurricane force gusts unless the track was to shift back to the west. Does not look like you're going to get the core in Lafayette. Do we have any other questions? I'll pause for just a few seconds in case anybody has something pressing that they would like to get answered. All right, seeing none, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. I will be back tomorrow morning to discuss what's happened with Ida overnight and be keeping up with coverage into landfall and beyond, because some of the worst impacts of this storm are going to be well after what's technically landfall. Hurricane is not a point, and all of southeastern Louisiana and the Mississippi Gulf Coast and inland into Mississippi is going to see at least some very serious flooding risks, and southeastern Louisiana with those wind and surge risks as well. All right, prepare, and I will be back tomorrow to go over the very latest. Stay safe, Louisiana, and keep watching the skies.